not everything should be installed directly on your system. For example, I don't recommend installing SQL Server directly, yet it's often the database I recommend when working with C#. This is just one of the reasons why Docker is such a great tool. In this video, we'll install Docker, but not the Docker desktop, since that has more overhead than we need, and we will instead install a different GUI management software for Docker. Now, this video is part of a series dedicated to developing C# applications on Linux. Along the way, we'll gain a better knowledge of how Linux works and how to make our apps run truly cross-platform. If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel to stay informed of new episodes as they come out. And if you're looking for even more .NET, SQL, Azure, or more training, go to imtimcorey.com. Okay, let's go to docker.com. And in here, what we're going to do is we're going to go to support for actually documentation. Let's go to documentation. And then down here is install Docker engine. And this is going to give you instructions for how to install Docker pretty much anywhere. And for us, we're going to go to Ubuntu, and right down here is the commands for installing using the apt repository, which we're going to use. We're going to use apt, that way you can keep it up to date, etc. But to do that, we have to add Docker's official GPG key in order to then talk to the apt source for Docker and be assured we're getting the right container. Basically, we're adding to apt and saying, hey, you can also look in the Docker location for Docker stuff. But in order to trust that and make sure it's a trusted one, we have to install the certificate, which sounds complicated. And yes, there's a whole bunch of commands right here. The cool thing is we can hit copy. Now, I do not recommend that you just randomly install new certificates and randomly trust new sources. You should trust the source first, meaning verify it, vet it, make sure that it's a good source to trust. In this case, I trust Docker. If they were to say, hey, we're going to start sending malware down, well, that'd be a problem, but that's a problem no matter who you trust. So you might need to make sure that you trust only good sources. This is a little bit more secure than what Microsoft does. They don't tend to have this certificate check and all the rest. So there's a bit more, fast and loose with your installations and updates. So this is a better way of doing things, I think, but it does mean you have to worry about certificates. So I'm gonna hit copy here. I'm over my terminal, and let's make this, oops. What's the command for the Control Shift? There you go. Control Shift, make it a little bigger. Control Shift plus, sorry. And right click and say paste. And that's the whole command, all the commands. And what this is doing is it's installing a certificate, it's putting a key ring, it's getting the certificate from Docker's location, it's making a modification to the permissions, it's then adding the repository to the apt sources. So that's writing to the file, notice the EOF to EOF. That's putting that in the sources, and there's where it comes from and how it's signed. So that's all the command we're running. And so we're gonna hit enter. I have to put my password in because it's a sudo command. And it's going to run those commands, get all the information, and we're good to go. So now that's installed, it's not installed Docker yet. It's just installed the certificate for Docker. So now I can get it via apt. So notice here is the actual command, sudo apt install. And if you go over here, you can see the full name for it. So I close the terminal, oh well. Let's paste that new command in, which is the actual installation of Docker. So this is how we're going to install Docker. Hit enter. Again, sudo password. Do you want to continue? Yes, I want to continue installation. So that's going to download and install Docker. And when it does, it's going to make sure that Docker runs in the background. So Docker is going to restart when we restart Linux. So that's it. Now we are up and running with Docker. Now, if we wanted to do a test on this, we do something like, let's clear a screen here, sudo docker run hello world. And so we're going to pull that image down, and what it does, it says hello from Docker. And this message shows your installation appears to be working correctly. So this is the hello world container is a container that just gives you a one run once kind of thing where it runs it and then it closes it down. And all it does is it says, hey, yep, you're running. You've proved that you have Docker up and running. So that's it. We now have Docker installed. You can do any Docker command you want. But if you notice, I did have to do sudo for Docker. So if I were to say Docker run hello world, like you would on Windows, it says, hey, permission denied, because you need admin permission in order to run Docker. Now, that is probably a good thing. And if you're in a production environment, if you're on a server, if you're working with multiple people on the machine, then I would encourage you to leave this just as it is. You have to type sudo and put your password in, etc. But if you're on your personal development machine, so let's be very clear here, your personal development machine that you're working on your own, then you can kind of bypass the need for sudo. So clear screen here. So what we're going to do is do sudo usermod, meaning we're going to modify the user information, -ag. So we're going to append a user to a group. So what's the group? Docker. And what's the user? $user. Yes, case matters. So what we're going to do is we're going to append our current user to the Docker group, which will allow us to run Docker commands without having to do sudo. Okay, so we hit enter, done. That's it. Now, it won't work yet because if we would try and run the Docker command, it says permission denied. And the reason why is you have to log off and log back on. So come down here and we're going to say log out. And then once we do, we'll log right back in as soon as it logs out. So it's going to refresh. We can also run a command to reload the Docker window. Boy, it's being slow. There we go. So I can log back in now. And once we do, now we can come over to our terminal. Let's make it a little bigger and say Docker run hello world. Notice no sudo. Permission denied. Excellent. So it didn't apply that properly. So let's figure out why that's the case. So first of all, let's see if this should already have been executed. We executed that correctly. So that command looks good. Let's go ahead and restart just in case that log off and log back on was a little long. So let's just see if maybe there was a problem with that. Okay, so now it's rebooting. This may take a bit. It shouldn't be too long, but if you're in doubt, reboot, right? So waiting. All right, come on back up. There we go. So this isn't a necessary step. You don't have to do a step. If you want to decide, you know what, I don't want to do take the sudo away, that's fine. But it is a convenience factor, and it's much more like what you'd have in Windows. So Docker run, there we go. So a restart helped. So the log off and log back on didn't refresh that group the way I wanted it to, but the restart did. I believe normally a log off is all you need, but evidently we have more to do. By the way, the from last version, the toolbox is starting by default. I'm gonna quit that. I don't want to have toolbox installed all the time. We can modify that later if we want. But now we have Docker running without the need for sudo. Okay, so now the last thing I want to do is I want a GUI because Docker, Docker, or what is the command? Docker PS. And Docker images. Like, I don't want to remember these things, right? I don't want to have to keep my in my mind what's all the commands for this, and this is not exactly a great look. Again, I forgot Docker PS versus Docker LS. So because that LS is not command for Docker, but trying to remember all that kind of stuff is a little frustrating. And yes, you can do it. You can write down the shortcuts or whatever, or the names, but there's a better way. And that better way, let's make this a little bigger, is to install a tool called Portainer. So Portainer is actually a container. So we're going to have to download a Docker image and execute the Docker image into a container. And that's called Portainer CE. So community edition of Portainer. If you got to look for portainer.io, you're going to find Portainer, but it's going to be all about the paid version. You're going to look at that and go, I don't want to pay for this. And that's the enterprise edition. You don't want the enterprise edition. You want the community edition, which is free. So let's see how to run this. So Docker, remember, no sudo necessary now. Docker run -d, which means disconnected, -p, which is port 9000. We're going to map over to port 9000. And then we're going to say, actually, you know what? Before I do this, I do want to add one. Before I add run the container, I do want to add a volume. So Docker volume create Portainer data. Wow. There you go. So what that's going to do first is I want to create a volume. What a volume is it's a spot on your hard drive. Now, for this, it's going to be buried in the Docker settings. We don't have to worry about where it is. What this is going to do is it's going to create a folder on our machine that containers can have access to. We say, hey, use this volume. What that allows for is, remember, containers are ephemeral. Like, we can delete them and start over, which is fine, except for the fact that if they had a data in them, that data gets blown away, which is fine in a lot of cases. But in this case, you actually want to have access to that data long term. If we destroy Portainer's container and recreate it, we still want to have access to the same data. So we're going to create a volume first, which allows us to persist data between runs, between restarting, etc. So there is our new container. Great. Now we have that container. Now we can do our Docker run disconnected port 9000, mapped to 9000. The name of the container we'll call Portainer. We have two variables here, or first one is, volumes. First is var run docker.sock, not rocker, docker.sock, maps over to var run docker.sock. So it's going to map that. It's going to map this volume over to that volume, which essentially says, hey, you can have access to my docker.sock location, which what that allows for is Portainer to have access to our Docker containers and our Docker setup and our Docker configuration and all the rest, which we want because it's going to modify it. Okay, and then we're going to say one more volume, -v, and say Portainer _data, sound familiar, goes to data internally. So the volume we just created called Portainer _data is going to map over to /data inside the container. And then we're going to run Portainer /Portainer-CE. That's a community edition of Portainer. Now, if you get a little lost here, first of all, if you trust me, you can just run that command. I encourage you to actually understand the commands you run. Don't just run things blindly. But that is something you can do, is just run the command and it just works. But I would encourage you to learn more about Docker. I've got a video on YouTube about Docker and how it works. I have a whole course on Docker and the commands and the switches and all the rest. to really understand it. Docker is an incredibly powerful tool, and it's something that I think every developer needs to know how to do. If you don't, well, you're losing out on a really big amount of what makes developers super powerful. There's so many things we can do with it. It's just really, really valuable. So it's going to download the Portainer container, image, and that's going to execute. And that's it. We're now done. You might say, well, nothing happened. Well, you're right in a way. We didn't see anything happen. But if we come now to our browser and open up our keyring first, and we go to localhost :9000. Remember, we mapped over port 9000. And it says Portainer. Now it's going to ask for a password. And it's generating a password. It has to be 12 characters long. So that's my password. When we do, it says, hey, quick setup wizard. Do you want to get started? Do you want to add more environments? We're just going to get started because we don't need to add more environments. And it says, hey, we can dismiss this news. It says, hey, I've got a local environment, which is up and running. That's us. So click to that. And now you have a dashboard of what's running. We have 2 images. We have 3 networks. We have 3 containers and 1 volume. So let's look at first the images. Well, we have the Hello World latest. We have the Portainer/Portainer CE latest. Those are the 2 images we have downloaded. Now, if you don't know about Docker, there's a difference between images and containers. Images are read-only, and they're not doing anything. We use an image to then create a container. And that container is the thing we execute. So these are the 2 images we have downloaded. And then here in our containers, we can see that we actually have 2 hello worlds. They're stopped. We ran them. They ran and they stopped. We also have Portainer, which is running. So this is kind of a little meta here. We've got Portainer running and seeing that we have Portainer running. So we can dive into Portainer and see more information about it. We could start, stop, remove, etc. with it. We could see that it's running. We could see more information about the details, the path environment paths, the labels, restart policy, etc. So we have all the information we need in here about this, what networking information it uses, etc. We can see here that under our containers back here, we could come over here and actually let's open up this one here first and come down to, I believe we can open up the console. Not console, sorry. Logs. There we go. Logs. And if we do, we can see that down here, the logs, it says hello from Docker. Remember that? That's the logs of what it outputted before it closed. And it gave us the information. Well, that's just a log. So we could see what was executed. And if we want, let's go back to 100%. We come over here and we could select this. Again, it's a GUI thing. We can hit remove and hit remove. And now that container is gone. Or we could do is select this and say, hey, now, by the way, log statement, there's the one set of logs, right? We can come over here and say start. And it starts and it stops again. You may say, well, did it work? Go to logs. And now notice the log statements are duplicated. So we have hello world up here, and we have hello from Docker and hello from Docker down here. So it did work. It ran it again, and then it closed it again because that's what this is designed to do. So we can hit remove and remove that. And now we have just our one container that is running, and that's Portainer itself. So this is how you install Docker. This is how you get a GUI for Docker. If you want to have a GUI for Docker, I would encourage you to have a GUI for Docker. It makes it a whole lot easier. This kind of shows you what's going on, where your volumes are at. There's the Portainer data. So you can open that up, see where the actual path is. That's var lib docker volumes Portainer data _ data. So that's the mount path for that. And there's all the information about it. Okay, so this is a really helpful tool. It's a whole lot lighter than Docker Desktop for Linux. So it takes less resources to run this, which is really important because we don't want to have a really heavy thing that's for running other things, right? We want to keep it as light as possible and keep our system resources available for the actual work we want to do. So Portainer I recommend using. Check it out. It's super easy to understand. There's a lot of things here. It's a GUI, so you can kind of bounce around through very easily. It's going to ask you to upgrade a business edition, but you don't need to upgrade business edition. You can use the community edition just fine. It works great. I really like it as a tool. So that's Portainer, that's Docker, that's how you get things installed. That's important because coming up in a couple of videos, we're going to start working with SQL Server and other resources when we start building C# apps. In order to have SQL Server, we're going to use a container. It's a whole lot easier. It's one line of terminal command, and that's it. Like you just run this command, and all of a sudden you have SQL Server up and running. And then when you're done, you can come up with your containers and say, you know what? I want to, now we can't do this with Portainer because it's a special one. I want to pause this, or I want to stop this, and then stop it when you're not using it, and then start it again when we are. Because tools like SQL are designed to be enterprise tools that take up a lot of resources intentionally. They want to be as efficient as possible, but in order to do that, they take a lot of resources. So just having that always running on your computer isn't wise because you're not needing it. And so therefore you have a whole lot of resources being consumed when you're not needing them to be consumed. So you just turn it off, you're not needing it. So containers are really important for things like SQL Server and for Redis and other tools that we don't need to install locally, just need to have a container for them. So we'll start using this pretty soon. But for now, that's how to get Docker installed. That's how to get Portainer up and running. That's how to get started. Now, if you already know how to work with containers, I would encourage you, try it out. Maybe put SQL Server on here beforehand so you can kind of figure out what edge cases you run into and what questions you have so that when that video does come out, you're ready and can kind of look for those things that you missed. All right, thanks for watching. As always, I am Tim Corey.